Marcus Bennett had endured the CEO's contempt for exactly 47 minutes when the plane's engine exploded. The woman who'd treated him like trash would soon be begging him to save her life. Before we continue, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like the video, and comment where in the world you're watching from. Let's go. The cabin pressure wasn't the only thing making it hard to breathe. Marcus Bennett sat in seat 23C with his 6-year-old daughter Zoe pressed against his side, her small fingers clutching the worn fabric of his jacket like it was the only solid thing in a tilting world. The flight from Phoenix to New York had been delayed 3 times already, and every additional hour in the terminal had stretched his carefully budgeted patience thinner and thinner. Now finally airborne, he could feel the weight of 100 small failures pressing down on his chest. The tickets he'd bought on a payment plan, the connecting flight they'd probably miss, the job interview waiting for him in Manhattan that represented his last real shot at giving his daughter the life she deserved. Zoe shifted in her seat, and Marcus instinctively tightened his arm around her shoulders. She was trying so hard to be brave, his little soldier, but he could see the anxiety in her wide brown eyes. She hated flying. More than that, she hated the stares, the whispers, the way people looked at them and made their silent calculations. Single father, worn clothes, the subtle distance that opened up in crowds when they walked by. At 6 years old, his daughter was already learning to read the world's judgment, and it broke something in him every single time. The woman in seat 23A made her presence known before Marcus even saw her face. The scent arrived first, expensive perfume that probably cost more than his monthly rent, followed by the sharp click of designer heels on the cabin floor. She stopped beside their row, her eyes scanning the seat numbers with the kind of impatience that suggested she wasn't used to waiting for anything or anyone. She was striking in that effortless way that came from a lifetime of advantage. Her blonde hair pulled back in a sleek ponytail, her tailored navy suit probably custom made. She looked at the middle seat, then at Marcus and Zoe, and her expression shifted almost imperceptibly. It was a look he'd seen before. Displeasure, calculation, the quiet hope that maybe she could trade to a different row. Victoria Ashford was not having a good day. Her merger deal had hit a snag in Phoenix, forcing her to take a commercial flight instead of her usual private jet. Commercial, the word tasted bitter in her mouth. She was the CEO of Ashford Enterprise, a woman who'd built a tech empire from the ground up, and now she was crammed into economy plus like some entry-level analyst. The universe had a sense of humor, and today it wasn't funny. She looked at the man in the window seat and his child, taking in the details with the same analytical eye she used in boardroom. Discount store jacket, off-brand sneakers. The little girl's hair was done neatly in 2 puffs, but her pink dress looked like it had been washed so many times the color had faded to almost white. Victoria felt a familiar tightness in her chest, the one that came from being reminded that the world wasn't made entirely of marble lobbies and first-class lounges. She sat down without a word, pulling out her phone and tablet, creating a barrier of expensive technology between herself and her fellow passengers. Marcus felt Zoe shrink against him even more, making herself smaller, trying to disappear. He wanted to tell her it was okay, that they had every right to be here, but the words stuck in his throat. Instead, he pulled out the battered coloring book he'd brought and the small pack of crayons, the cheap kind that broke if you pressed too hard. Zoe took them gratefully, her face brightening just a fraction, and began to color with the intense focus only a child could muster. The flight attendant began the safety demonstration, and Marcus forced himself to pay attention, though he'd heard it dozens of times during his years of service. That felt like a different lifetime now, a different man. He caught himself before the memories could flood back, before the familiar weight of what he'd lost could pull him under. Focus on now. Focus on Zoe. That was all that mattered. 20 minutes into the flight, Zoe's crayon slipped from her small hand and rolled across the aisle, coming to rest near Victoria's Italian leather briefcase. The little girl looked up at her father, her eyes wide with worry. Marcus started to unbuckle his seatbelt to retrieve it, but Zoe was faster. She slipped out of her seat and crouched down to pick up the crayon, her small voice barely above a whisper. "Excuse me, miss. I'm sorry. My crayon fell." Victoria looked down, and the annoyance that flashed across her face was brief, but unmistakable. She shifted her briefcase away as if the child might somehow contaminate it. "Just be more careful," she said, her tone clipped and cold. "Some of us are trying to work." Zoe grabbed the crayon and scrambled back to her seat, her face flushed with embarrassment. Marcus felt something hot and sharp twist in his gut. He met Victoria's eyes, and for a moment the air between them was charged with unspoken tension. "She's 6 years old," Marcus said quietly, his voice steady despite the anger simmering beneath the surface. "She wasn't bothering you. She was apologized." Victoria's eyes narrowed slightly. "I didn't say she was bothering me. I simply asked for consideration. This is a public space after all." The implication was clear. A public space that perhaps they didn't quite belong in. Marcus bit back the response that wanted to leap from his tongue, the one that would tell this entitled woman exactly what he thought of her attitude. Instead, he turned his attention back to Zoe, who was now hunched over her coloring book, pressing the crayon so hard the paper was starting to tear. "Hey, baby girl," he murmured, gently taking her hand. "Easy. The dragons don't like to be colored that hard. They're ticklish." Zoe looked up at him, and despite everything, a small smile tugged at the corner of her lips. "Ticklish dragons, Daddy?" That's silly. That's right, he said, bopping her nose gently with his finger. Super silly, just like your old man. For the next hour, Marcus did everything he could to keep Zoe entertained and quiet. He made up stories about the clouds they were flying through, turned the in-flight magazine into an impromptu picture book, and played tic-tac-toe on napkins with a pen the flight attendant had given them. But children, especially anxious children on long flights, could only stay still for so long. Zoe started to fidget. She kicked her legs, which didn't quite reach the floor, and the rhythmic thump, thump, thump against the seat frame was soft but persistent. Victoria's fingers stopped moving across her tablet screen. She sat perfectly still for a moment, her jaw tightening. And then she turned to Marcus with a look of barely controlled irritation. Could you please control your child? Some of us are trying to concentrate. Marcus felt the familiar heat rise in his chest again, but before he could respond, Zoe's small voice cut through the tension. I'm sus. I'll stop, I promise. Her voice was so small, so eager to please, and it made Marcus want to put his body between his daughter and every harsh word in the world. Victoria looked at the child, and for a brief second, something flickered in her expression. Guilt, maybe, or recognition of her own cruelty, but it passed quickly, replaced by a cold mask of indifference. Thank you, she said stiffly, turning back to her work. Marcus pulled Zoe onto his lap, wrapping his arms around her, and whispered into her hair, You didn't do anything wrong, baby. You hear me? You're perfect. Zoe nodded, but he could feel the tension in her small body. The way she was trying so hard to be good, to be invisible, to not be a problem. It killed him. The turbulence hit without warning. The plane jolted violently, dropping what felt like 100 feet in a single sickening lurch. The overhead bins rattled, the lights flickered, and somewhere in the back of the plane, someone screamed. The seatbelt sign dinged on with an urgent chime, and the captain's voice crackled over the intercom, strained and professional. Folks, we're experiencing some unexpected rough air. Please remain seated with your seatbelts fast. Flight attendants, take your seats immediately. Another jolt rocked the cabin, harder this time, and Zoe let out a sharp cry of fear, burying her face in Marcus's chest. He held her tight, his heart pounding, his combat-trained instincts reading the fear in the cabin like a language he'd once spoken fluently. This wasn't normal turbulence. Something was wrong. The plane shook again, a violent sideways lurch that sent unsecured items flying through the cabin. Victoria's tablet slid from her lap and clattered to the floor. She grabbed for the armrest, her knuckles white, her carefully constructed composure cracking at the edges. The fear in her eyes was raw and real, and in that moment, she looked less like a powerful CEO and more like every other terrified passenger on the flight. Marcus glanced out the window and saw what the others couldn't see yet. Black smoke, thin but unmistakable, trailing from the left engine. His blood ran cold. The turbulence wasn't turbulence, it was mechanical failure. The captain's voice returned, and this time the professional veneer was paper thin. Ladies and gentlemen, we have a situation. We're experiencing a problem with one of our engines. We're going to need to make an emergency landing. Please follow all crew instructions and remain calm. The cabin erupted into chaos. People were crying, praying, clutching each other. The flight attendants moved through the aisles with forced calm, checking seatbelts, collecting loose items, their training overriding their own fear. Marcus felt Zoe shaking in his arms, her sobs muffled against his chest, and something ancient and fierce rose up inside him. He would not let his daughter die afraid. He would not let her last moments be filled with terror. Then the pilot's voice came again, strained but steady, cutting through the panic like a blade. This is Captain Reynolds. I need to know if there's anyone on board with military experience. If you've served any branch, any capacity, I need you to identify yourself to the flight crew immediately. This is not a drill. I repeat, if there's any ex-military personnel on board, we need you now. The question hung in the air like a flare in the darkness. Marcus felt every muscle in his body tense. He hadn't thought about those years in a long time, hadn't let himself remember the man he used to be before everything fell apart. But the call was clear, and despite everything, despite the fear and the pain and the failures, he was still a soldier. He always would be. He looked down at Zoe, her tear-stained face pressed against his chest, and then he looked up at the flight attendant rushing past. Here, he called out, his voice cutting through the chaos with a command he hadn't used in years. I'm former military, Staff Sergeant Marcus Bennett, United States Army. Whatever you need, I'm here. The flight attendant, a young woman with red hair and eyes wide with barely controlled panic, stopped at Marcus's row. Her name tag read Jennifer, and her hands were shaking as she leaned down to speak to him. The captain needs you in the cockpit, sir, right now. Marcus nodded, his mind already shifting into the mode he thought he'd left behind years ago. The chaos of the cabin faded to background noise, and in its place came a crystal-clear focus. He turned to Zoe, cupping her tear-streaked face in his hands. Baby girl, I need you to be brave for me. Can you do that? I need you to stay right here in your seat. Keep your seatbelt on tight, and hold on to Miss R. Bear. He pulled the small stuffed animal from his jacket pocket, the one Zoe had insisted on bringing. She clutched it to her chest, her eyes enormous. Where are you going, Daddy? I have to go help the pilot, sweetheart. I promise. I'm gonna make sure we land safe. Do you trust me? Zoe nodded, her chin trembling. I trust you, Daddy. Always. Marcus stood, and as he did, he became aware of Victoria watching him. The cold disdain had vanished from her face, replaced by something else. Fear, yes, but also confusion, as if she was seeing him for the first time and couldn't reconcile what she was seeing with the man she'd dismissed just an hour ago. He met her eyes, and his voice was quiet but carried a weight that made her sit up straighter. "Watch her, please." It wasn't a request. It was an order, delivered with the kind of authority that didn't allow for refusal. Victoria opened her mouth, perhaps to protest, perhaps to refuse, but something in his gaze stopped her. She looked at the little girl beside her, at Zoe's terrified face and the stuffed bear clutched in her small hands, and she felt something crack open inside her chest. She nodded slowly. "I'll watch her, promise." Marcus squeezed Zoe's hand one more time, then turned and followed Jennifer toward the front of the plane. The cabin was a chaos of crying passengers and flight attendants trying desperately to maintain order. He moved through it all with purposeful calm, his presence somehow steadying the people he passed. A middle-aged man grabbed his arm as he went by. "Are we going to die? Is this it?" Marcus stopped, looked the man in the eye, and spoke with absolute conviction. "No, we're not. Hold on tight and trust the crew." Then he was moving again through the galley, past the first-class curtain to the reinforced cockpit door. Jennifer punched in the code with trembling fingers, and the door swung open. The cockpit was a contained storm of flashing lights and urgent beeping. Captain Reynolds sat in the left seat, his hands moving across the controls with practiced precision despite the sweat beading on his forehead. The co-pilot, a younger man whose name tag read Martinez, was on the radio, his voice tight as he communicated with air traffic control. Reynolds glanced back as Marcus entered, his eyes doing a quick assessment. "You're military?" "Former Army," Marcus confirmed, stepping forward. "Staff Sergeant Marcus Bennett. Combat medic, but I've got flight training. Helicopters mostly, some fixed wing." Reynolds' jaw tightened, and Marcus saw a flicker of relief in the captain's eyes. "That'll do. We've lost the left engine completely. The right one is failing. We've got maybe 10-15 minutes of controlled flight left before this bird becomes a very expensive glider. We need to put her down, and I need every hand that knows what the hell they're doing." Marcus moved to the jump seat behind the co-pilot, his eyes scanning the instrument panel. The altimeter was unwinding steadily. They were at 22,000 feet and descending. The artificial horizon showed they were in a slight bank, and the engine temperature gauges told a story of catastrophic failure. "How far to the nearest airport?" Martinez answered without looking up. "LaGuardia is 70 miles out. Teterboro is 60. We're not making either one." Reynolds' voice was grim. "We've got an open field about 12 miles southwest. It's our best shot." Marcus felt his stomach drop, but his voice remained steady. "Have you done an emergency landing before?" Reynolds shook his head. 30 years flying commercial, and every single one landed at a gate. Until today. "Then today you break your streak," Marcus said, and there was something in his tone, a confidence born from walking through fire and coming out the other side that made Reynolds' shoulders relax just a fraction. "Talk me through what you need." For the next 8 minutes, Marcus became an extension of the flight crew. He monitored instruments, called out altitude and airspeed, communicated with the flight attendants to prepare the cabin. Reynolds was a good pilot, maybe even a great one, but he'd never flown a crippled plane toward an emergency landing with 200 souls depending on him. Marcus had jumped out of helicopters under fire. He'd stabilized dying men in the back of shaking Humvees. He knew how to function when the world was falling apart. "Captain, you're drifting left," Marcus called out. "Compensate 2 degrees right," Reynolds adjusted. "Airspeed is dropping. 140 knots. Martinez, get on the horn with ground emergency service. I want every ambulance and fire truck in the county at that field." Bernays complied, his voice gaining strength from Marcus's calm. Back in the cabin, Victoria Ashford was experiencing a crisis of her own. She sat rigid in her seat, her expensive tablet forgotten on the floor, staring at the little girl beside her. Zoe had stopped crying, but her eyes were fixed on the cockpit door, waiting for her father to return. The stuffed bear was clutched so tightly that Victoria could see the white of her knuckles. Around them, the cabin was descending into barely controlled panic. A woman 3 rows back was praying loudly in Spanish. A businessman was typing furiously on his phone, sending what Victoria realized with a chill were probably goodbye messages. The flight attendants moved through the aisles with forced smiles, demonstrating brace positions, their professionalism a thin veneer over their own terror. Zoe turned to look at Victoria, her young face far too serious for a 6-year-old. "Is your daddy scared when the plane shakes?" Victoria blinked, caught off guard by the question. "I don't know. I'm not here with my father." "Do you have kids?" The question landed like a physical blow. Victoria had built an empire. She'd negotiated billion-dollar deals, fired executives without blinking, crushed competitors who underestimated her, but she'd never had time for a family. Never made space for it. The question from this child, this little girl she'd dismissed and looked down on, exposed a hollowness she'd spent years pretending didn't exist. "No," she said quietly. "I don't." Zoe nodded as if this explained everything. "That's sad. My daddy says everyone needs someone to love. It makes you strong." Not. Victoria felt something burning behind her eyes, an emotion she couldn't name. She looked at this child, at her faded pink dress and her neat hair puffs, and her absolute faith in her father, and she saw everything she'd missed in her relentless climb to the top. Before she could stop herself, she reached out and gently touched Zoe's hand. "Your father is very brave, and so are you." Zoe's face brightened just a little. "He's the bravest. He was a soldier, you know. He saved lots of people. He has medals in a box under his bed, but he never talks about them. He says real heroes don't need to brag. They just do what's right when nobody's watching. The simple wisdom of those words, delivered in a child's voice, made Victoria's carefully constructed world feel suddenly very small. In the cockpit, the situation was reaching its critical point. They were at 5,000 feet, the field visible through the windscreen. It was a stretch of open farmland, brown and dormant in the late autumn chill. Reynolds' voice was tight. Gear down is going to create too much drag. We'll never make it. We're going in, wheels up. Marcus didn't hesitate. Agreed. Full flaps. Nose up. I'm going to kiss the ground like you're landing on glass. Martinez, kill all non-essential systems. We need every ounce of power for control. The co-pilot's hands flew across the panel, shutting down systems, routing power. The plane groaned around them, a dying mechanical beast fighting to stay airborne. 3,000 feet. The ground was rushing up now, details becoming clear. There was a farmhouse to the left, a red barn, a line of trees they'd need to clear. Reynolds' breathing was coming in short gasps. I can't do this. I'm gonna kill everyone. Yes, you can, Marcus said, his voice cutting through the pilot's panic like a blade. I've done this 1,000 times in the simulator. This is just another landing. Focus on the horizon. Feel the plane. She wants to fly. Let her. Reynolds' hands steadied on the yoke. Martinez, get on the PA. Tell everyone to brace. Now, the co-pilot's voice echoed through the cabin. Ladies and gentlemen, this is the cockpit. Brace for impact. Lean forward, head down, hands over your head. Brace, brace, brace. The cabin erupted in screams and prayers. Victoria looked at Zoe, and without thinking, she unclicked her own seatbelt and pulled the little girl onto her lap, wrapping her arms around her, shielding her with her own body. Zoe didn't resist. She buried her face in Victoria's shoulder, and the CEO felt the child's tears soaking through her expensive silk blouse. I've got you, Victoria whispered, surprised by the fierceness in her own voice. I've got you, sweetheart. 2,000 feet. The trees were dead ahead. Pull up, Marcus called. Reynolds hauled back on the yoke and the plane's nose lifted. They cleared the tree line by less than 50 feet. 1,000 feet. The field filled the windscreen. Steady, Marcus said. Steady. Hold her. 500 feet. The ground was a blur. Reynolds' entire body was shaking. 200 feet. Marcus placed his hand on the captain's shoulder. You've got this, Captain. Bring her home. The plane hit the ground. The impact was beyond violent. It was a collision between hope and earth, between metal and mortality. The plane's belly scraped against frozen ground with a sound like the world being torn in half. Marcus felt his body slammed forward against the restraints, felt his teeth crack together, felt the cockpit shake so hard his vision blurred. The nose gear, already damaged, collapsed immediately, sending the front of the plane plowing into the dirt. They were skidding, spinning, the world outside the windscreen a chaotic blur of brown earth and gray sky. Metal shrieked, glass shattered, the right wing clipped something, a fence post maybe, and the plane lurched violently to the side. Reynolds was screaming commands, his hands fighting the controls, trying to keep them straight, trying to bleed off speed without flipping them end over end. Marcus's training took over, his body moving on instinct, calling out their angle, their speed, preparing for the worst. They hit something else, harder this time, and the cockpit filled with the acrid smell of burning electronics. Then, impossibly, miraculously, the screaming metal began to slow. The shaking became less violent. The world stopped spinning quite so fast. And then, with a final shuddering groan that seemed to come from the plane's very soul, they stopped. The silence that followed was absolute and terrible. For 3 full seconds, no one moved. No one breathed. They were waiting for the explosion, for the fireball, for the final chapter of their story, but it didn't come. Marcus unbuckled his harness with shaking hands and looked at Reynolds. The captain was slumped in his seat, his hand still gripping the yoke, his eyes wide and glassy with shock. Captain, Marcus said, his voice hoarse. Captain, we're down. Made it. You did it. Reynolds blinked, seemed to come back to himself, and let out a sound that was half laugh, half sob. We're alive. Holy God, we're alive. Martinez was already on the radio shouting their position, calling for emergency services. Marcus didn't wait. He pushed himself out of the jump seat, his legs unsteady, and stumbled toward the cockpit door. The cabin. Zoe. He had to get to Zoe. The door opened onto a scene of carnage. The cabin was a disaster. Overhead bins had burst open, spilling luggage and debris everywhere. Oxygen masks hung like strange jellyfish from the ceiling. The emergency slides had deployed prematurely, blocking some of the aisles. People were screaming, crying, calling out for loved ones. There was blood, not rivers of it, thank God, but enough. A man near the front was cradling his arm, bone white and protruding from his sleeve. A woman had a gash across her forehead, blood streaming down her face, but they were alive. Against all odds, they were alive. Marcus pushed through the chaos, his eyes scanning frantically for row 23. His heart was thundering so hard he thought it might burst through his ribs. Please, God, please let her be okay, please. He saw them then. Victoria Ashford was still in her seat, hunched over, her body curved protectively around something small. Zoe. Marcus stumbled forward, nearly falling over a dislodged seat cushion, and dropped to his knees beside them. Zoe, baby. Victoria slowly lifted her head, and Marcus saw that she was crying. Not the delicate tears of a woman who'd learned to cry prettily, but the raw, ugly sobs of someone who just stared death in the face. "She's okay," Victoria gasped. "She's okay, I've got her, I didn't let go." Marcus reached out with shaking hands and took his daughter from Victoria's arms. Zoe was crying but conscious, her small body trembling violently. "Daddy," she sobbed. "Daddy, you came back. I promised, didn't I?" Marcus whispered, pressing his face into her hair, breathing in the scent of her, feeling the impossible gift of her heartbeat against his chest. "I promised I'd keep you safe." Around them, the flight attendants were moving through the cabin with remarkable efficiency despite their own trauma. Jennifer, the red-haired attendant who'd brought Marcus to the cockpit, was helping passengers unbuckle, checking for injuries, directing people toward the emergency exits. But Marcus could see the problem. The front exits were blocked by debris. The rear exit on the right side was jammed. They had maybe 2 functioning exits for 200 people, and the smell of fuel was growing stronger by the second. They needed to evacuate now. Marcus gently set Zoe down in Victoria's lap. "I need you to stay with her for just a few more minutes, baby girl. Can you be brave for me?" Zoe grabbed his jacket. "Don't go. Daddy, please don't leave me again." He cupped her face in his hands. "I'm not leaving. I'm right here. But there are people who are hurt, and I need to help them. That's what soldiers do. We help people." Victoria, still shaking, tightened her arms around Zoe. "I've got her," she said, and this time her voice was steady. "I won't let anything happen to her. Go." Marcus held Victoria's gaze for a long moment, seeing her truly for the first time. The Ice Queen who'd looked down on them was gone. In her place was a woman who'd just discovered something she'd forgotten she had. A heart. He nodded once, then stood and began to move through the cabin with purpose. The next 20 minutes were a blur of controlled chaos. Marcus fell back into the role he'd played in another life, triaging injuries, directing evacuation, keeping people calm. He found the businessman from earlier hyperventilating into a paper bag and talked him down. He helped an elderly woman with a broken ankle out of her seat and carried her to the exit. He used his belt as a tourniquet for a man with a deep laceration on his leg. The flight attendants, seeing his competence, began to defer to him, following his lead. "Get the injured out first," he called over the din. "Those who can walk, help those who can't. Stay calm, stay together, and get at least 50 yards from the plane." The fuel tanks could still go. Through it all, his eyes kept returning to row 23, checking on Zoe. Victoria hadn't moved. She sat there like a statue, holding his daughter, protecting her. And something about the sight of it, the powerful CEO cradling the child she'd dismissed, made Marcus's throat tighten with an emotion he couldn't name. The evacuation was moving, but too slowly. There were still at least 80 people in the cabin, and the smell of fuel was making his eyes water. Then he heard it, a sound that turned his blood to ice, a soft whoosh, followed by a crackle. Smoke began to seep into the cabin from somewhere toward the rear. Fire. Jennifer saw it at the same moment. Her face went white. "We need to move faster. We need to get them out now." Marcus grabbed her arm. "How many exits are functional?" "2. The right rear and the left overwing. That's it." "Not enough. Not nearly enough." Marcus looked at the mass of terrified people, many frozen with fear, clogging the aisles, and he knew they had minutes at most before panic took over completely and turned this evacuation into a deadly stampede. He needed to give them something, a leader, a voice of authority they could focus on. He pulled himself up onto the armrest of a seat and raised his voice, projecting it with the command he'd used on dust-blown fields half a world away. "Everyone, listen to me now. My name is Staff Sergeant Marcus Bennett, United States Army. We are getting off this plane, every single one of us. But I need you to trust me and follow my instructions exactly." The cabin fell silent, all eyes turning to him. That was better. Panic thrived in chaos, but discipline could overcome it. "Those of you near the exits, start moving out now. Single file, no pushing. When you get outside, move away from the plane and stay together. Those of you in the middle, start gathering your things. No luggage. Just grab the person next to you and be ready to move when I give the word." Marcus locked eyes with a burly man in a football jersey a few rows up. "You, what's your name?" The man blinked. "Derek. Derek, you look strong. I need you at the overwing exit helping people out. Can you do that?" The man straightened, seemed to find purpose in the request. "Yes, sir. I can do that." "Good man, go." Derek moved with purpose, suddenly transformed from a terrified passenger into someone with a job to do. Marcus pointed to a young woman with a yoga mat bag. "You, help Jennifer with the injured. Anyone with medical training, identify yourself and assist." 3 hands went up. "Good, get to work." The evacuation picked up speed, the passengers moving with new purpose. Marcus coordinated, directed, encouraged. He saw a mother struggling with 2 small children and scooped up the youngest, a toddler with wide eyes. "I've got him, Mama. You take your daughter's hand and get moving." The woman nodded gratefully and followed. The smoke was thicker now, and Marcus could see orange light flickering from the rear galley. They were out of time. He made his way back to row 23. Victoria looked up at him, and he saw the terror in her eyes. "We need to go now, don't we?" she asked, her voice small. Marcus nodded. "Right now." He reached for Zoe, but Victoria was already moving, clutching the little girl to her chest as she stumbled into the aisle on unsteady legs. Her expensive heels had broken off, her perfect suit was torn and stained, but she moved with determination. They joined the flow of people heading toward the overwing exit. The smoke was making everyone cough now, a thick, acrid haze that burned the lung. They were 20 feet from the exit, then 15. then 10. Behind them, Marcus heard a sound that made his blood run cold. A deep, resonant boom followed by screaming. He spun around. The rear galley was now fully engulfed in flames, and the fire was spreading forward with terrifying speed. People at the back of the evacuation line began to panic, pushing, shoving, screaming. The orderly evacuation was collapsing into chaos. 5 feet from the exit, Victoria stumbled. Her bare foot had caught on something, and she went down hard, twisting to protect Zoe as she fell. Marcus was there instantly, hauling her up with one arm, steadying her. I've got you. We're almost there. Just a few more feet. They reached the overwing exit where Derek, true to his word, was helping people out onto the wing and down the inflatable slide. Marcus lifted Zoe from Victoria's arms. Baby, you're going to go down this slide and I'll be right behind you, I promise. Zoe nodded, tears streaming down her face, but she trusted him. She'd always trusted him. Derek took her gently and set her on the slide. Down she went, into the arms of a flight attendant waiting at the bottom. Victoria was next. She hesitated at the threshold, looking back at Marcus. Thank you, she said, the words inadequate but sincere. Thank you for saving us. He didn't have time to respond. He simply put his hand on her back and guided her to the slide. Go. She disappeared down into the safety of the ground. Marcus turned back to the cabin. There were still people trapped in the back, cut off by the spreading fire. Jennifer stood beside him, her face streaked with soot and tears. We can't reach them, she said, her voice breaking. There's too much fire. Marcus looked at the flames, at the terrified faces beyond them, and felt the weight of every life he'd ever failed to save, pressing down on his shoulders. But he also felt something else, fierce, stubborn refusal to give up that had kept him alive through 3 tours in hell. Yes, we can, he said quietly. Just need to be smarter than the fire. Marcus's eyes swept the cabin with the calculating precision of a combat medic assessing a battlefield. The fire was spreading along the right side of the plane, feeding on spilled fuel and synthetic materials, but the left side was still relatively clear. The trapped passengers, maybe 15 of them, were clustered in the rear rows, their faces pale with terror behind the curtain of smoke and flame. They weren't cut off by fire directly. They were cut off by fear, frozen in place, unable to see a path through the chaos. That was something Marcus could work. He grabbed a bottle of water from a nearby service cart and soaked a cloth napkin, tying it around his nose and mouth. Jennifer, get everyone else out, I'm going back. Jennifer grabbed his arm, her grip surprisingly strong. You'll die back there, the whole plane could blow any second. Then I better move fast, Marcus said, and there was no bravado in his voice, just a simple statement of fact. He'd made a promise to himself a long time ago. Never leave anyone behind. Not again. He moved into the smoke, staying low where the air was clearer, using the seatbacks as guide. The heat was intense, pressing against his skin like a physical force. He could hear the fire now, a living thing with its own hungry breath, consuming everything in its path. He reached the trapped passengers and found them in various states of panic. An elderly couple clutched each other, too frightened to move. A young man in a business suit was hammering uselessly on a jammed exit door. 2 college-aged girls were sobbing in their seats. A mother held her infant against her chest, frozen with indecision. Marcus stood up, making himself visible through the smoke, and his voice cut through their terror like a blade. I need you to listen to me right now. The front exit is blocked, but the left side is clear. We're gonna move together, single file, staying low. If you can walk, you walk. If you can't, I'll carry you. But we are leaving this plane in the next 60 seconds. Do you understand? The young man at the jammed exit turned, his eyes wild. The door won't open. We're trapped. Then stop trying to open it and follow me, Marcus commanded. You first. Lead the way for the others. The authority in Marcus's voice bypassed the man's panic, activating some deep instinct to follow orders in a crisis. He nodded and stumbled forward. Marcus grabbed the elderly woman, her husband, and pointed them after the businessman. Go. Stay with him. Don't stop moving. The college girls came next. Then a middle-aged man with blood streaming from his nose. Then the mother with the infant. Marcus took the baby from her arms. You need both hands free to get through this smoke. I've got her. The mother hesitated for only a moment before the trust in Marcus's eyes convinced her. She nodded and moved. They formed a chain, each person holding onto the one in front of them, and Marcus led them through the nightmare. The smoke was thick enough now that he could barely see 5 feet ahead. His eyes burned. His lungs screamed for clean air, but he kept moving, counting heads, making sure no one fell behind. They passed through a section where the flames had reached the ceiling, heat radiating down like standing under a blowtorch. The elderly man stumbled, crying out, and Marcus caught him with one arm while cradling the infant in the other. Keep moving, sir. Almost there, just a few more feet. They emerged from the smoke like survivors of a shipwreck breaking the surface of the ocean, gasping and choking but alive. Jennifer and Derek were there, grabbing people, helping them to the exit. Marcus handed the infant back to her mother and did a final head count. 15, all accounted for. Jennifer's face was streaked with tears of relief. You crazy son of a gun. You did it. The elderly woman Marcus had helped grabbed his hand with surprising strength. God bless you, young man. God bless you. There was no time for gratitude. The fire had reached the midsection of the cabin now, and the entire aircraft groaned ominously. Marcus pushed the last passenger toward the exit. Everyone out now. Jennifer, you too. What about you? She asked. I'm right behind you. I just need to do one final sweep. Jennifer knew better than to argue. She disappeared down the slide, and Marcus turned back to face the burning plane one last time. He moved quickly through the forward section, checking under seats, in the bathrooms, in the galleys. It was standard protocol drilled into him during his military service. Never assume everyone is out until you've checked every space. The smoke was so thick now he was navigating by touch and memory. His lungs felt like they were filled with ground glass. Then, just as he was about to turn back, he heard it. A sound so small it was almost lost beneath the roar of the fire. A whimper, a child's whimper. His blood turned to ice. He followed the sound to the forward lavatory. The door was closed, and when he tried it, it was locked from the inside. He pounded on it. Is someone in there? The whimper came again, and then a small, terrified voice. I'm stuck. The lock is broken. I can't get out. Marcus didn't hesitate. He braced himself against the galley and kicked the door with everything he had. Once, twice, 3 times. The lock shattered and the door flew open. Inside, curled on the floor, was a boy of maybe 8 years old, his face streaked with tears and soot. Marcus scooped him up without a word and ran. The aisle was an inferno now, flames on both sides, but he didn't stop. He charged through it, feeling the heat sear his skin, smelling his own hair, singing, his lungs burning. 10 feet, 5 feet, the exit. He reached it and practically threw the boy out onto the slide, then dove after him. They hit the ground hard, rolling away from the plane. Strong hands grabbed Marcus, dragging him further from the wreckage. The boy was crying hysterically, and a woman, presumably his mother, was there instantly, sobbing as she pulled him into her arms. I couldn't find him, she wailed. I thought I'd lost him. I thought he was dead. Marcus lay on his back in the cold grass, gasping for air, his whole body shaking with adrenaline and exhaustion. Someone put an oxygen mask over his face, and he breathed deeply, the cool, clean air a benediction. Around him, the field was a chaos of emergency vehicles, flashing lights, and the organized confusion of rescue operations. Fire trucks were dousing the plane with foam. Paramedics moved between the survivors, assessing injuries, providing care. News helicopters circled overhead like mechanical vultures. Marcus sat up slowly, his body protesting every movement, and his eyes immediately searched the crowd. Zoe. Where was Zoe? Panic surged through him, giving him strength he shouldn't have had. He pushed himself to his feet, ignoring the paramedic who tried to make him lie back down. He stumbled through the sea of survivors, his heart pounding, calling her name. Zoe, Zoe. Then he heard it, the sweetest sound in the world. Daddy. He turned and saw her running toward him, Victoria close behind, trying to keep up. Zoe crashed into him with enough force to nearly knock him over, and he caught her, lifting her into his arms, holding her so tightly he was afraid he might break her, but he couldn't let go. He couldn't. I thought you were dead, Zoe sobbed into his neck. The plane was burning and you didn't come out, and I thought you were dead. Never, baby girl, Marcus whispered, his own tears flowing freely now. I will always come back to you, always. Victoria reached them and she stopped a few feet away, giving them their moment. When Marcus finally looked up at her, he saw that she was crying too. Her perfect composure was completely shattered, replaced by raw, unfiltered emotion. She looked at him with something like awe. You went back in. After everyone else was out, you went back in for one child. Marcus gently set Zoe down but kept hold of her hand. It's what you do. You don't leave people behind. Victoria shook her head slowly. I don't know anyone who would have done that. I don't know if I would have done that. Before Marcus could respond, a swarm of emergency personnel descended on them. Paramedics wanted to check Marcus for burns and smoke inhalation. A fire chief wanted a statement about the crash. A police officer needed to document his role in the evacuation. Through it all, Victoria stayed close, keeping Zoe with her, protecting her, while Marcus dealt with the barrage of questions and medical attention. It was a small thing, but it spoke volumes about the shift that had occurred in her. The woman who'd looked at them with disdain a few hours ago was now standing guard over his daughter like she was her own. An hour later, after the immediate chaos had subsided, they found themselves sitting together on the back of an ambulance, emergency blankets wrapped around their shoulders. Zoe was nestled between, finally calm, exhausted beyond measure. The plane was still smoldering in the field behind them, a twisted wreck of metal that should have been their tomb, but it wasn't. Against all odds, every single person on that flight had survived. There would be injuries to recover from, trauma to process, but they were alive. Marcus watched as Captain Reynolds stood with his crew, all of them staring at the wreckage with shell-shocked expressions. Reynolds caught Marcus's eye and walked over, his steps unsteady. Sergeant Bennett, he said, his voice hoarse from smoke. I need you to know something. Without you in that cockpit, without your help, we'd all be dead right now. I've been flying for 30 years and I've never been so scared in my life. But you were like ice. Like you'd done this 1,000 times. Marcus shook his head. You brought us down, Captain. You kept your head when it mattered most. That was all you. Reynolds' eyes grew wet. Maybe, but I couldn't have done it alone. He held out his hand. Thank you for everything. Marcus shook it, feeling the tremor in the older man's grip, the weight of gratitude and survival. After Reynolds walked away, Victoria spoke for the first time in long minutes. I owe you an apology. Marcus looked at her, surprised. For what? For everything, she said quietly. For the way I looked at you on the plane. For the way I dismissed you and your daughter. For thinking I was better than you because I had more money or a fancier title. I was wrong. So completely wrong. Marcus was quiet for a moment, then he spoke with a gentleness that surprised even him. We all make judgments. It's human nature. What matters is what you do when you realize you were wrong. Victoria looked down at Zoe, who had fallen asleep against her side. When this plane was going down, when I thought we were all going to die, do you know what my biggest regret was? She asked. Not that I hadn't made more money or closed more deals. It was that I'd never let anyone close enough to matter, that I'd die alone. She looked up at Marcus and her eyes were raw with honesty. And then this little girl, this child I'd been so cruel to, trusted me to keep her safe. And you trusted me with the most precious thing in your world. I don't deserve that trust, but I'm grateful for it. Marcus felt something shift in his chest, some door he'd kept locked for years creaking open just a fraction. You kept her safe. That's all that matters to. Victoria smiled. A small, genuine smile that transformed her face. It's funny how life works. A few hours ago, we were strangers. Now I feel like I've known you forever. Marcus looked at her, really looked at her, and saw not the CEO who'd mocked them, but a woman who'd been broken open by crisis and found something real inside herself. Maybe that's what it takes sometime, a reminder of what actually matters. They sat in comfortable silence as the sun began to set over the field, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. Around them, the business of disaster response continued, but for this one moment, they were just three people who'd survived the impossible, bound together by fire and fear and the strange alchemy of crisis that could turn strangers into family. The hospital was a stark contrast to the chaos of the crash site. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting everything in a sterile white glow that hurt Marcus's smoke-damaged eyes. He sat in a plastic chair in the emergency room waiting area, Zoe asleep in his lap, her small body finally surrendering to exhaustion. They'd been checked over by doctors, poked and prodded, X-rayed and examined. Zoe had some bruising from the impact and minor smoke inhalation, but otherwise she was miraculously unharmed. Marcus had second-degree burns on his forearms from the final rescue and his lungs felt like he'd swallowed broken glass. But he was alive. They were both alive. That was all that mattered. Victoria sat beside them, her own emergency blanket still draped around her shoulders. She'd refused to leave, even when the hospital staff had tried to move her to a private room. A woman of her stature, they'd said, deserved privacy, comfort, special treatment. She'd looked at them with an expression that could have frozen fire and said she was staying exactly where she was. Now she sat in silence, occasionally glancing at Marcus and Zoe, as if she needed to confirm they were real, that this whole impossible day had actually happened. The waiting room was filling up with other survivors from the flight. Some had family members rushing in, tearful reunions playing out in corners. Others sat alone, staring at walls, processing trauma in their own private ways. The young mother whose infant Marcus had carried through the fire approached them hesitantly. Her baby was clean now, wrapped in a fresh hospital blanket, sleeping peacefully. "Excuse me," she said, her voice soft. "I never got to thank you properly. You saved my daughter's life." Marcus looked up at her, seeing the exhaustion and gratitude warring in her expression. "I was just doing what anyone would have done." "No," the woman said firmly, "not anyone. Most people would have saved themselves. You went back. You risked everything." She reached out and touched his shoulder gently. "My name is Sarah. My daughter's name is Hope. I named her that because I wanted her to be a light in the world. Today, you were her light. You were all of ours." She looked at Victoria too, including her in the gratitude. "Thank you both for getting us through this." After Sarah walked away, Victoria was quiet for a long moment. Then she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "Does it ever get easier?" Marcus looked at her. "Does what get easier? Carrying the weight of other people's lives? Knowing that your decisions, your actions determine whether they live or die?" Marcus thought about the question, about the men he'd saved in Afghanistan and the ones he couldn't save, about the children he'd treated in field hospitals and the ones who'd died before he could reach them. He thought about his wife, about sitting helpless beside her hospital bed while cancer ate her from the inside out. "No," he said honestly. "It never gets easier. You just learn to carry it better." Victoria absorbed this, and Marcus saw something in her eyes, a recognition of the cost of responsibility that she understood in her own way. She'd made decisions in boardrooms that had determined the fates of thousands of employees, their jobs, their families, their futures. But it had always been abstract, numbers on spreadsheets, names on organizational charts. Today, she'd held a terrified child in her arms while a plane fell from the sky. Today, responsibility had a face and a heartbeat and tears that soaked through silk blouses. It changed you, that kind of responsibility. It marked you. The automatic doors of the emergency room slid open, and a wave of reporters surged in like a flood. Hospital security moved to intercept them, but the damage was done. Cameras flashed. Microphones were thrust forward. Questions came in a barrage. "Sergeant Bennett, how does it feel to be a hero?" "Miss Ashford, is it true you're the CEO of Ashford Enterprises? What were you doing in economy class? Can you describe the moment of impact? Were you afraid you were going to die?" Marcus instinctively curled his body around Zoe, shielding her from the lights and noise. She stirred in his arms, whimpering. Victoria stood up, and the CEO that Marcus had glimpsed on the plane returned in full force. Her voice cut through the chaos like a knife. "Back off. Now there are injured people here trying to recover. You have no right to be in this space. Show some basic human decency and leave." A reporter, a sleek man in an expensive suit, pushed forward anyway. "Miss Ashford, the public has a right to know what happened. We understand you were seated next to Sergeant Bennett during the flight. Is there a relationship between you two?" Victoria's eyes blazed. "The only relationship we have is that we survived a plane crash together. Now get out before I have you arrested for harassment." But the reporters weren't backing down. They sensed a story, something bigger than just a crash. A CEO and a janitor, They'd learned from other passengers. A single father and his daughter, a hero who'd saved everyone. It was narrative gold, and they were hungry for it. Hospital security finally managed to push the reporters back outside, but the damage was done. Zoe was awake now, frightened by the commotion, clutching Marcus's neck. Daddy, who were those people? Why were they yelling? Just people with questions, baby. They're gone now, but they weren't gone. Through the windows, Marcus could see them setting up camp outside the hospital entrance. Cameras pointed at every exit. Waiting, they were trapped. A hospital administrator approached them, a hurried-looking woman with kind eyes. I'm so sorry about that. We're doing everything we can to keep them out, but they're persistent. She looked at Victoria. Miss Ashford, we have a private exit you can use. We can have a car brought around, get you out of here without them seeing you. Victoria looked at Marcus and Zoe, then back at the administrator. Can they come with me? The administrator hesitated. Well, I suppose if Sergeant Bennett agrees. Marcus was about to refuse. He didn't need special treatment, didn't want to be indebted to anyone, especially not to someone like Victoria Ashford. But then he looked at Zoe, at her tired, frightened face, and he thought about walking through that crowd of reporters with her. The cameras, the questions, the invasion of their privacy. His daughter had been through enough today. She deserved peace. He nodded slowly. Thank you. That would be appreciated. 10 minutes later, they were in the back of a town car, sleek and black with tinted windows, pulling away from the hospital through a service exit. The reporters never saw them leave. Zoe sat between Marcus and Victoria, her head resting on her father's arm, finally calm again. The driver, a professional who asked no questions, navigated through the streets in silence. Where are we going? Marcus asked. Victoria looked at him. Where were you supposed to go? After the flight. We were supposed to land at LaGuardia. I had a hotel booked near Times Square. Nothing fancy, just a place to sleep before my interview tomorrow. The interview Marcus had almost forgotten. The whole reason for this trip, the job that was supposed to change their lives, give him a chance to be more than just a man barely scraping by. But that was tomorrow's problem. Today had used up all his capacity for worry. You can't go to a hotel, Victoria said. Not tonight. The press will find you within an hour. They'll camp outside your door. You and Zoe won't get a moment's peace. Marcus's jaw tightened. I don't need charity. I'm not offering charity, Victoria said, and there was no condescension in her voice, just simple practicality. I'm offering a safe place for a little girl to sleep without cameras in her face. I have an apartment here in the city. It's private, secure, and big enough that you'll have your own space. Stay there tonight. Tomorrow, when things calm down, you can figure out your next move. Marcus wanted to refuse. Pride, that stubborn thing that had sustained him through years of struggle, demanded that he refuse. But when he looked down at Zoe, saw the dark circles under her eyes, the way her small body was still trembling slightly from stress, his pride didn't seem very important. Okay, he said quietly. Just for tonight. Thank you. Victoria's apartment was in a building so exclusive it didn't even have a visible entrance from the street. The car pulled into an underground garage. They took a private elevator, and suddenly they were stepping into a space that looked like it belonged in an architecture magazine. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the glittering Manhattan skyline. The furniture was modern and minimalist, all clean lines and expensive fabrics. Original artwork hung on the walls. Everything was perfect, pristine, and utterly impersonal. It looked like a showroom, not a home. Victoria saw Marcus taking it in and felt a sudden embarrassment. I know it's not exactly kid-friendly. I don't usually have children here. I don't usually have anyone here. Marcus could believe that. This was the home of someone who lived for work, who came back to sleep and change clothes and nothing more. It was beautiful and cold and desperately lonely. There's a guest bedroom down that hall, Victoria said, pointing. It has its own bathroom. Please make yourselves comfortable. Marcus carried Zoe toward the bedroom, but at the threshold she lifted her head and looked back at Victoria. Miss Victoria, will you stay with us? Just for a little while? I don't want to be alone yet. Victoria froze, clearly not expecting the request. She looked at Marcus uncertain. He gave a small nod. We'd be glad for the company. So Victoria followed them into the guest room, and the three of them sat together on the enormous bed. Zoe, despite her exhaustion, wasn't quite ready to sleep. The adrenaline was still working its way out of her small body, manifesting as restless energy and a need to talk. Daddy, she said, her voice small. Were you scared? On the plane? Marcus pulled her close. I was terrified, baby girl. But you know what kept me brave? She shook her head. Knowing that you needed me. When you love someone that much, when they're counting on you, it gives you strength you didn't know you had. Zoe processed this with the seriousness only children could bring to big questions. Like how mommy was brave when she was sick. Marcus felt his throat tighten. He rarely talked about his wife with Zoe, not because he didn't want to, but because the grief was still so close to the surface that sometimes speaking about her felt like tearing open a wound. Yes, sweetheart. Exactly like that. Your mom was the bravest person I ever knew. Victoria watched this exchange, and something inside her chest cracked open a little wider. She'd spent 15 years building walls around herself, convincing herself that emotion was weakness, that connection was a liability. But sitting here, watching this father and daughter navigate their grief and love with such raw honesty, she realized what a lie that had been. Strength wasn't about being untouchable. Strength was about being brave enough to feel everything and keep going anyway. Zoe turned to Victoria, her young face thoughtful. Miss Victoria, do you have a family? Victoria hesitated. My parents passed away several years ago. I was an only child, so no, not really. That's sad, Zoe said with the blunt honesty of children. Everyone should have a family. Family doesn't always mean people you're born with, baby. Marcus said gently. Sometimes family is the people who show up for you when it matters, like how Miss Victoria stayed with you today when I had to go help the pilot. Zoe nodded sagely. So Miss Victoria is family now? Marcus looked at Victoria and their eyes met across the small space of the bed. He saw the vulnerability in her gaze, the hope and fear mixed together. If she wants to be, he said softly. Victoria felt tears prick her eyes for what felt like the 100th time that day. She'd cried more in the past 12 hours than she had in the past 12 years. I'd like that very much, he whispered. Zoe smiled, satisfied with this arrangement, and finally let sleep claim her. Within minutes, she was breathing deeply, her small face peaceful at last. Marcus and Victoria sat on either side of her, neither quite ready to move, to break the spell of this strange, impossible day. Tomorrow would bring questions and challenges. Tomorrow they'd have to face the world and its expectations. But tonight, in the quiet sanctuary of this moment, they were just three survivors finding unexpected comfort in each other's presence. Marcus woke to the sound of the city 20 floors below, a distant hum of traffic and life that filtered through the expensive windows. For a disoriented moment, he couldn't remember where he was. The bed was too soft, the sheets too fine, the ceiling too high. Then it all came rushing back. The plane, the fire, the impossible survival. He turned his head and saw Zoe still asleep beside him, her small hand curled around his thumb, even in sleep. She'd had nightmares twice during the night, waking up screaming about flames and falling. Each time he'd held her and whispered reassurances until she calmed. Each time Victoria had appeared in the doorway, concern etched on her face, asking if they needed anything. The third time, she'd simply come in and sat in the chair by the window, keeping silent vigil until dawn. Marcus slipped carefully out of bed, tucking the blanket around Zoe, and made his way to the kitchen. The apartment looked different in morning light, less like a museum and more like a beautiful cage. He found the coffee maker, expensive and complicated, and after a few moments of studying it, managed to get it working. The smell of brewing coffee filled the kitchen, warm and normal and grounding. He heard soft footsteps and turned to find Victoria standing in the doorway. She'd changed from yesterday's ruined suit into simple yoga pants and an oversized sweater. Her hair was down, falling loose around her shoulders. Without her armor of designer clothes and perfect styling, she looked younger, more vulnerable, and somehow more real. I couldn't sleep, she admitted, moving to the counter. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the ground rushing up at us. Marcus poured 2 cups of coffee and handed her one. It'll fade. Not quickly, but it will. The brain needs time to process trauma. You can't rush it. Victoria wrapped her hands around the mug, seeking its warmth. How do you do it? How do you function after seeing what you've seen? The things you experienced in the war, losing your wife, and now this? How do you keep going? Marcus leaned against the counter, considering the question. He'd asked himself the same thing 1,000 times, usually at 3 in the morning when the ghosts were loudest. You find something worth getting up for. For me, that's Zoe. She needs me, so I get up. It's that simple and that complicated. Victoria took a sip of her coffee. I've spent my entire adult life building an empire. I've made more money than I could spend in 10 lifetimes. I've been on magazine covers, given keynote speeches, won awards. And yesterday, when I thought I was going to die, none of it mattered. Not one bit. All I could think was how empty my life has been. How I've spent years accumulating things instead of building connections. The honesty in her voice was raw and painful. Marcus saw her clearly then, not as the CEO who'd looked down on him, but as a woman who'd just realized she'd been climbing the wrong mountain her entire life. Before he could respond, his phone buzzed. He'd managed to get it charged during the night, and now the notifications were flooding in. Missed calls, text messages, voicemails, all from numbers he didn't recognize. He scrolled through them with growing unease. Then he opened a news app and felt his stomach drop. Their story was everywhere. The headline on the biggest news site read, "Hero Veteran Saves 200 Lives in Miracle Crash Landing." Below it was a photo, grainy but unmistakable, of him carrying the child out of the burning plane. Another article, "Billionaire CEO and single dad bond in disaster." There were photos of Victoria, of Zoe, speculation about their relationship, interviews with other passengers describing what had happened. Their privacy had been shredded and scattered across the internet for public consumption. Victoria looked over his shoulder and paled. God, I should have known this would happen. "Marcus, I'm so sorry." "You didn't do anything wrong," Marcus said, but his jaw was tight. "This is just what happens now. Everything becomes entertainment." His phone rang, an unknown number, and he answered it before thinking. "Hello, Mr. Bennett? This is Carol Hendricks from the Today Show. We'd love to have you on the program tomorrow morning to talk about your heroic actions. We're prepared to offer you and your daughter an all-expenses-paid trip to our studio. And of course, there would be an appearance fee." Marcus ended the call without responding. The phone immediately rang again. He turned it off. Victoria watched him, seeing the tension in his shoulders, the way his hand clenched around the phone. They're gonna hound you, aren't they? For days, maybe weeks. Everyone wants the hero story, the human interest piece. They don't care that you just want to be left alone. Marcus set the phone down on the counter like it was something dangerous. "I have a job interview today." Had a job interview. It was supposed to be at 9 this morning at a security firm in Midtown. It was going to be my fresh start, my chance to give Zoe a better life. Now, he gestured at the phone. "Now I'm a story, the guy from the plane. It's all anyone will see when they look at me." Victoria's mind was already working, shifting into the problem-solving mode that had made her a successful CEO. "What kind of job were you interviewing for?" "Security consultant," Marcus said. "I have experience in threat assessment, crisis management, emergency response. All the skills they teach you. I've been working warehouse jobs for the past 3 years, but I wanted something better. Something where I could use my brain again, not just my back. Victoria was quiet for a moment, her expression thoughtful. What if I told you I have a better offer? Marcus looked at her wearily. I told you I don't want charity. This isn't charity, Victoria said firmly. This is business. Yesterday, you didn't just save lives. You demonstrated skills that most security consultants could only dream of having. Crisis management under extreme pressure, tactical thinking, leadership, the ability to keep people calm in chaos. My company has been looking for someone to head our corporate security division for 6 months. The position pays $250,000 a year, plus benefits, plus housing assistance. Marcus stared at her. You're offering me a job? I'm offering you the job you were meant to have, the one your skills actually warrant. She met his eyes. I'm not doing this because of yesterday. I'm doing this because you're qualified and I need someone like you. The fact that you saved my life is just how I happened to discover you existed. Marcus wanted to refuse. Every instinct screamed that accepting this offer would make him indebted to, would make him dependent on her goodwill, would erase the independence he'd fought so hard to maintain. But then he thought about Zoe, about the tiny apartment they lived in, about the way he had to choose between buying her new shoes or paying the electric bill. He thought about giving her stability, security, a future where she didn't have to worry. I need to think about it, he said finally. Of course, Victoria replied. Take all the time you need. The offer stands regardless. They were interrupted by the soft patter of small feet. Zoe appeared in the doorway, Mr. Bear clutched in her arms, her hair adorably disheveled. Daddy? I had another bad dream. Marcus was at her side instantly, lifting her into his arms. I've got you, baby girl. You're safe. Zoe buried her face in his neck, then peered out at Victoria. Good morning, Miss Victoria. Good morning, sweetheart, Victoria said, and her voice was gentler than Marcus had ever heard it. Are you hungry? I could make us breakfast. Do you know how to make pancakes? Zoe asked hopefully. Victoria hesitated, and Marcus saw a flicker of uncertainty cross her face. I'll be honest, I'm not much of a cook, but I can order the best pancakes in the city. 20 minutes later, they sat around Victoria's glass dining table, eating pancakes from a restaurant that Marcus was certain charged more per pancake than he usually spent on groceries for a week. Zoe, resilient in the way only children could be, was chattering happily about Mr. Bear's adventures, creating elaborate stories to distract herself from yesterday's trauma. Victoria listened with genuine interest, asking questions, laughing at the silly parts. Marcus watched them interact and felt something shift in his chest. This woman, this stranger who'd judged them so harshly just yesterday, was becoming something else, something that felt dangerously close to important. His phone, which he'd turned back on to check the time, buzzed with an incoming call. He glanced at the screen and his expression changed. I need to take this, he said, stepping into the next room. Victoria watched him go, then turned her attention back to Zoe, who was building a tower out of pancake pieces. When Marcus returned 5 minutes later, his face was carefully neutral, but Victoria could see the tension around his eyes. Everything okay? She asked. That was my landlord, Marcus said quietly, clearly not wanting Zoe to hear. Apparently there are reporters camped outside my building. My neighbors are complaining. He's asking me not to come back for a few days until things die down. The words landed like stones. Marcus had nowhere to go, no home to return to, no safe haven. Stay here, Victoria said immediately. I have plenty of space. Stay as long as you need. Marcus shook his head. Victoria, we can't. This is your home. You've already done more than enough. I insist, she said, and there was steel in her voice. You and Zoe need a place where you can be safe from the media circus, where she can recover from what happened without cameras in her face. I have the space. I have the resources. And honestly, she added, her voice softening, I'd like the company. This place has been empty for too long. Marcus looked at her, saw the sincerity in her eyes, and felt his resistance crumbling. He was so tired of having to be strong all the time, so tired of carrying every burden alone. Maybe, just this once, it was okay to accept help. Okay, he said finally. A few days, until things calmed down. Thank you. Zoe, who had been pretending not to listen, let out a squeal of delight. We're having a sleepover? A long one? For a few days, yes, Marcus confirmed. But you need to be on your best behavior. This is Miss Victoria's home, and we're guests. I'll be so good, Zoe promised solemnly. I'll be the goodest guest ever. Victoria laughed, a genuine sound that seemed to surprise her. I'm not worried, Zoe. You're already the best guest I've ever had. The rest of the morning passed in a strange new domesticity. Victoria showed them around the apartment, opening up rooms that clearly hadn't been used in months. There was a home office filled with filing cabinets and awards, a gym that looked like it had never been touched, a library with leather-bound books that appeared more decorative than read. Everything was beautiful and unused. It was a home that no one actually lived in. By afternoon, the outside world was becoming harder to ignore. Victoria's phone was ringing constantly with calls from her board members, her assistant, reporters requesting interviews. Marcus's phone was the same. They'd created a bubble in this apartment, a temporary sanctuary, but reality was pressing in from all sides. Victoria finally answered one of her calls, stepping onto the balcony to speak privately. Marcus could see her through the glass, her posture shifting from relaxed to rigid as she spoke. When she came back inside, her expression was troubled. My board wants me to do a press conference, she said. They think it's good publicity, showing the human side of the company. They want me to talk about the crash, about the survival. She looked at Marcus. They want you there too. They think a joint appearance would be powerful. Marcus felt a familiar anger rising. I'm not a prop for your company's image. I know, Victoria said quickly, and I told them you're a private citizen who deserves to be left alone. But Marcus, they're not going to stop. The media, the board, the public, everyone wants a piece of this story. Maybe if we give them one controlled statement, answer their questions once, it'll be enough to satisfy them and they'll move on. Or it'll just feed the fire, Marcus countered. Make it bigger. Turn us into celebrities instead of just people who survived something terrible. Victoria nodded slowly. You're right. I'm sorry. I shouldn't have even suggested it. Forget the press conference. They sat in silence for a moment, both feeling the weight of the world outside trying to force its way in. Finally, Victoria spoke again, her voice quiet but determined. I've made a lot of mistakes in my life, Marcus. I've prioritized all the wrong things. But yesterday, sitting on that plane holding your daughter while we fell from the sky, I realized something. The only thing that matters is who you hold on to when everything's falling apart. She looked at him, her eyes bright with unshed tears. I'd like to be someone worth holding on to. Not the CEO, not the billionaire, just me. The person I might have been if I hadn't forgotten how to be human. Marcus felt his throat tighten with emotion. Yesterday I saw who you really are. When it mattered most, when there was nothing to gain and everything to lose, you protected my daughter with your own body. That's not something you can fake. That's who you are, Victoria. Whether you've been letting yourself be that person or not. The moment stretched between them, charged with something neither of them was quite ready to name. Then Zoe's voice broke through, calling from the other room. Daddy, Miss Victoria, come look. I made him bear a house out of couch pillows. And just like that, the intensity dissolved into something softer, something that felt almost like family. 3 days passed in their temporary sanctuary, and they fell into a rhythm that felt both strange and natural. Marcus would wake early, his military training impossible to shake, and make coffee while watching the sunrise paint the city in shades of gold and pink. Victoria would join him, and they'd talk in quiet voices about everything and nothing. She told him about building her company from a single coding contract in her college dorm room, about the ruthless decisions she'd had to make, about the loneliness of always being the smartest person in the room. He told her about Afghanistan, about the friends he'd lost, about his wife's final days, about the guilt that came with surviving when others didn't. Zoe became the bridge between them, her innocent presence easing conversations that might otherwise have been too heavy. She'd claimed a corner of Victoria's pristine living room as her own, filling it with coloring books and stuffed animals. Victoria, who'd never spent time with children, found herself enchanted by Zoe's imagination. By the way, she could turn a cardboard box into a spaceship or a blanket fort into a castle. One afternoon, Victoria came home from a brief trip to her office to find Zoe had reorganized her bookshelf by color instead of author. Instead of being annoyed, Victoria found herself smiling. The apartment looked more alive with a 6-year-old's chaos in it, but the outside world wouldn't stay away forever. On the 4th morning, Victoria's assistant called with urgent news. The board was demanding a meeting. There were questions about her judgment, concerns about her extended absence, whispers that the crash had affected her mentally. She needed to return to the office and reassert control. Victoria hung up the phone and found Marcus watching her from the kitchen doorway. He'd heard enough to understand. You need to go back to work, he said. It's not a question. She nodded slowly. If I don't, they'll start maneuvering to replace me. Corporate boards are like sharks. They smell weakness and circle. Marcus moved closer, then go. Show them you're stronger than ever. We'll be fine here. Victoria hesitated. What if the reporters find you while I'm gone? Then I'll handle it, Marcus said with a confidence that made her believe him. I've faced worse than aggressive journalists. Go do what you need to do. 2 hours later, Victoria walked into the boardroom of Ashford Enterprises wearing her armor, a sharp black suit, her hair pulled back in a severe bun, her expression cold and unreadable. The 12 board members sat around the massive table, and she could feel their assessment, their judgment. The chairman, a silver-haired man named Robert Kellerman, spoke first. Victoria, we're glad you're back. We've been concerned. Concerned about what, Robert? Victoria asked, her voice cool as she took her seat at the head of the table. About your well-being, naturally. A plane crash is a traumatic event. We worry it might have affected your capacity to lead. Victoria's eyes swept the room, reading them like she'd read countless opponents across countless negotiations. This wasn't concern. This was opportunity. They saw her moment of vulnerability and wanted to exploit it. I survived a plane crash, gentlemen, Victoria said, leaning back in her chair. I watched an engine fail at 20,000 feet. I held a terrified child while we fell from the sky. I evacuated through smoke and fire, and I'm sitting here 4 days later ready to work. If that's not capacity to lead, I don't know what is. One of the younger board members, a venture capitalist named Winters, spoke up. It's not about your strength, Victoria. It's about optics. You've been living with this man, this veteran. The press is having a field day speculating about your relationship. It's becoming a distraction from the company's message. Victoria's expression didn't change, but inside she felt white-hot anger building. Let me be very clear. My personal life is my own. What I do outside of this office is none of your concern as long as I continue to grow this company and increase shareholder value, which, if you check the numbers, I've been doing for 15 consecutive years. Kellerman shifted uncomfortably. We're simply suggesting that perhaps some distance might be appropriate. For the company's image, Victoria stood slowly, placing her palms flat on the table, her voice dropping to a dangerous quiet. Marcus Bennett saved 200 lives on that plane, including mine. He risked his life repeatedly while others panicked. He's a better man than anyone in this room, and if you think I'm going to distance myself from him to protect your delicate sensibilities, you've fundamentally misunderstood who I am. The boardroom was silent. She let the moment hang, then continued. Here's what's going to happen. I'm going to continue running this company the way I always have. You're going to continue collecting your generous board fees and staying out of my way. And if any of you have a problem with that, you know where the door is. She walked out without waiting for a response, her heart pounding but her stride confident. In the elevator down to her office, she allowed herself a small smile. That felt good, better than good. She'd spent years bending herself to fit what the board expected, what investors wanted, what the business world demanded. For the first time in longer than she could remember, she'd chosen herself. Back at the apartment, Marcus was having his own reckoning. Zoe was napping, exhausted from a morning of energetic play, and he sat alone with his thoughts. He'd been avoiding them, staying busy, focusing on Zoe and Victoria, but now they caught up with him. He pulled out his phone and did something he hadn't done in months. He called his sister. She answered on the second ring, her voice sharp with worry. Marcus? Oh my God, I saw the news. Are you okay? Is Zoe okay? We're fine, Amy. We're safe. Where are you? I've been calling your apartment. The landlord said reporters were everywhere. We're staying with someone, Marcus said carefully. Someone from the plane. Amy was quiet for a moment. The CEO? The one they're talking about on the news? Marcus sighed. Her name is Victoria. And yes, Amy, I've seen the pictures, Marcus. I've read the articles. They're saying you two are together, that it's some kind of romance. It's not like that, Marcus said, but even as he spoke the words, he wondered if they were true. What is it like then? Amy asked gently. Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like maybe you're finally letting someone in. And honestly, big brother, it's about time. Marcus was quiet, his sister's words hitting closer to home than he wanted to admit. I can't, Amy. I can't do that to Sarah's memory. Sarah's been gone for 3 years, Marcus. She loved you. She'd want you to be happy. She'd want Zoe to have someone besides just her dad. I know you loved her. I know you still do. But you're allowed to love again. It's not a betrayal. It's being human. Marcus felt tears sting his eyes. What if I'm not ready? Then you're not ready. But don't close the door out of guilt. Sarah wouldn't want that. They talked for another 20 minutes about Zoe, about the crash, about life. When Marcus hung up, he felt lighter somehow, as if a weight he'd been carrying had been acknowledged, if not quite lifted. That evening, Victoria returned to the apartment looking simultaneously exhausted and exhilarated. She found Marcus and Zoe in the kitchen attempting to make dinner. Zoe was standing on a chair, carefully stirring something in a pot while Marcus supervised. Quote, they looked up when she entered, and the smile that broke across Victoria's face was unguarded and genuine. You're cooking? She asked, surprised. We're trying, Marcus said with a self-deprecating grin. Zoe insisted we make you dinner since you always order food for us. It's spaghetti, Zoe announced proudly. With meatballs. I helped make them. They're a little lumpy, but Daddy says that means they're made with love. Victoria felt something crack open in her chest. When was the last time someone had cooked for her? When was the last time she'd come home to people who were happy to see her? I can't wait to try them, she said softly. They ate together at the table, and the lumpy meatballs were perhaps the best thing Victoria had ever tasted. Not because of their culinary merit, but because they represented something she'd been missing her entire life. Care, thoughtfulness, family. Zoe chattered about her day, about the drawing she'd made for Miss Victoria, about the story Daddy had told her. Marcus watched Victoria's face soften as she listened, saw the way she engaged with Zoe so naturally now, asking questions and laughing at the silly parts. This woman who'd been ice on the plane was melting, and it was beautiful to witness. After dinner, after Zoe had been tucked into bed with M.R. Bear and a story, Marcus and Victoria found themselves on the balcony again. The city sprawled beneath them, millions of lights representing millions of lives, all of them continuing their own stories. I went back to the office today, Victoria said. How did it go? The board tried to suggest I distance myself from you. For optics, Marcus tensed. And I told them where they could put their optics. She turned to look at him. I'm not going to pretend this didn't happen, Marcus. I'm not going to act like knowing you and Zoe is something to be ashamed of. You changed my life. Both of you. Marcus was quiet for a long moment. You changed ours too. We came on that plane with nothing but hope and a prayer. Now we have a place to stay, a friend, maybe even a future I hadn't dared to imagine. I don't know what this is between us, but I know I don't want to lose it. Victoria reached out and took his hand. It was a simple gesture, but it felt monumental. Neither of them pulled away. Then don't lose it, she said simply. Let's figure out what this is together. No pressure, no expectations, just see where it goes. Marcus squeezed her hand gently. I have a lot of baggage, Victoria. A lot of ghosts. I don't know if I'm capable of being what you need. I don't need you to be anything except who you are, Victoria said. The man who runs into burning planes. The father who would die for his daughter. The person who sees me. Not the CEO or the money, just me. That's all I need. They stood together in the cool night air, hands linked, looking out of the city. Neither of them knew what tomorrow would bring, but for the first time in a long time, both of them felt something they'd almost forgotten. Hope. It was fragile and new and terrifying, but it was there, growing in the space between their hands, in the quiet of the evening, in the possibility of what they might become together. Inside, Zoe slept peacefully. Mr. Bear clutched in her arms, dreaming of pancakes and pillow forts, and the nice lady who smelled like flowers. She didn't understand the complicated adult emotions swirling around her, but she understood the important things. Her daddy was smiling again. The apartment felt warm instead of empty, and Miss Victoria looked at them like they were the most precious things in the world. In Zoe's simple wisdom, that meant everything was going to be okay, and maybe, just maybe, she was right. The first real test of their fragile new connection came on the 7th day. Marcus woke to find Victoria already dressed in her business attire, her laptop open on the kitchen counter, her expression troubled. He poured himself coffee and waited, knowing she'd speak when she was ready. Finally, she looked up and he saw genuine distress in her eyes. There's a problem. One of the other passengers from the flight is selling their story to a tabloid. They're claiming that you and I were already involved before the crash, that we staged sitting together, that the whole thing is some kind of publicity stunt for my company. Marcus felt anger flash through him. That's insane. We'd never met before that flight. They literally set up a cruel joke. I know that, you know that, but the tabloid doesn't care about truth. They care about clicks. And this story is sensational enough that other outlets will pick it up. Marcus set down his coffee cup with enough force that it clattered against the granite. So what do? Victoria closed her laptop. My PR team says we have 2 options. We can ignore it and hope it dies down, but that risks the narrative spinning out of control. Or we can get ahead of it. Do an interview. Tell our story in our own words. I won't do that to Zoe, Marcus said immediately. I won't put her in front of cameras and microphones. She's 6 years old. She's already been through enough. I agree, Victoria said, but we might not have a choice. If this story gains traction, if people start believing we were some kind of couple before the crash, it doesn't just damage my reputation, it damages yours. It makes your heroism look calculated. It turns everything we survived into a lie. They were interrupted by Zoe padding into the kitchen, MR Bear dragging behind her. Good morning, she said sleepily, climbing into Marcus's lap. Good morning, baby girl. Did you sleep well? She nodded, then looked between the 2 adults with the perception children somehow possessed. Are you fighting? No, sweetheart, Victoria said quickly. We're just talking about grown-up things. Boring stuff. Zoe didn't look convinced, but she let it drop. Can we go to the park today? I want to see the ducks. Marcus looked at Victoria, silently asking if it was safe. She pulled out her phone, checked something, then nodded. There's a private park attached to the building. Residents only. No press can get in. We can go there. Zoe's face lit up, and just like that, the tension was broken by a child's simple joy. The private park was a small oasis in the middle of Manhattan, a carefully manicured green space with a fountain, flower beds, and yes, a small pond with ducks. Zoe ran ahead, her laughter echoing off the surrounding building. Marcus and Victoria followed more slowly, maintaining a respectful distance that felt both natural and frustrating. They were orbiting each other, drawn together but held apart by fear and uncertainty and the weight of the watching world. How did you end up in the military? Victoria asked as they walked. You don't strike me as someone who grew up wanting to be a soldier. Marcus smiled slightly. I didn't. I was pre-med in college, actually. Wanted to be a doctor, but my 2nd year, my father died suddenly. Heart attack. The medical bills, the funeral expenses, it wiped out everything my family had. My mom, my younger sister Amy, they needed help, so I enlisted. The Army paid for my medical training and I could send money home. You gave up your dreams for your family, Victoria said softly. That's who you are, Marcus shrugged. It didn't feel like giving up. It felt like doing what needed to be done, and I don't regret it. I met Sarah in the Army. She was a nurse. We served together, fell in love, built a life. If I hadn't enlisted, I wouldn't have had Zoe, so maybe everything happens for a reason. Victoria was quiet, processing this. I've never had anyone depend on me like that. My parents were wealthy. I never had to sacrifice anything. When they died, I used my inheritance to start my company. I've only ever had to think about myself. Until now, Marcus said, watching her. Now you're thinking about us. She met his eyes. Yes. Now I'm thinking about you and Zoe, and it terrifies me because I don't know how to be someone who matters to other people. You already do, Marcus said gently. You matter to Zoe. You've given us safety and kindness when we needed it most. That's not nothing, Victoria. That's everything. Before Victoria could respond, Zoe came running back, breathless and excited. Miss Victoria, come see. There's a baby duck, and it's so tiny and fluffy and perfect. Come see. She grabbed Victoria's hand and pulled her toward the pond. Marcus followed, watching as Victoria knelt down beside Zoe, listening with complete attention as his daughter explained the complex social dynamics of the duck family. He pulled out his phone and took a photo without thinking. It was a perfect moment, captured in pixels. The powerful CEO and the 6-year-old girl both entranced by a baby duck. When Victoria looked up and caught him taking the picture, she smiled. It was the most beautiful thing he'd ever seen. That afternoon, while Zoe napped, Marcus made a decision. He found Victoria in her home office, surrounded by papers and screens, fighting the battles of the corporate world from her fortress of technology. Can we talk? He asked from the doorway. She immediately closed her laptop and gave him her full attention. Of course. What's on your mind? I've been thinking about your job offer, the security position at your company. Marcus sat down across from her desk. I want to accept it, but I need to know this isn't about what's happening between us. I need to know that if things don't work out, if we try this and it falls apart, my job won't disappear. Victoria leaned forward, her expression serious. Marcus, I'm going to be completely honest with you. When I first made that offer, it was partially about gratitude and wanting to help, but I've spent the last week watching you. The way you handle problems, the way you think strategically, the way you stay calm under pressure. You're exactly what that position needs. So yes, I want you to take the job. And no, it has nothing to do with anything personal between us. If we try a relationship and it doesn't work, you'll still have your position. I'd put that in writing if it would make you feel better. That would make me feel better, Marcus admitted. I need to be able to support Zoe regardless of what happens with us. I need to know she's secure. Victoria pulled out a legal pad and began writing. Then consider it done. I'll have my lawyers draw up a contract that explicitly states your employment is independent of any personal relation. You'll have a 5-year guaranteed contract with performance bonuses and severance protection. Does that work? Marcus felt the knot in his chest loosen slightly. Yes. That works. Thank you. Victoria set down her pen and looked at him. Marcus, I need you to understand something. I've made a lot of mistakes in my life, but I don't make mistakes in business. If I'm offering you this position, it's because you've earned it. You flew into a war zone in that cockpit when you could have stayed in your seat. You evacuated 200 people from a burning plane. You ran back into fire to save one child. That's not just heroism. That's the kind of leadership and judgment that can't be taught. My company needs that. I need that. The vulnerability in her voice made Marcus's chest tight. When do I start? 2 weeks. That gives you time to find a permanent place to live, get Zoe enrolled in school, settle in. She paused. Or you could stay here. Plenty of space. This place is too big for just me anyway. Marcus wanted to say yes. God, he wanted to say yes. But something held him back. Victoria, if we're gonna try this, try us. I need to do it right. I need to court you properly, take you on dates, build something real. I can't do that if we're already living together. It would be too easy, too fast. We'd skip all the steps that matter. Victoria smiled, and there was both disappointment and respect in her expression. You're probably right, but for the record, I wouldn't have minded skipping steps. Marcus laughed. I'm sure you wouldn't, but my daughter is watching how I do this. I want to show her what it looks like when a man treats a woman with respect, takes his time, does things right. I want her to have that model for when she's older. Victoria felt something warm bloom in her chest. You're a good father, Marcus. Zoe is lucky to have you. I'm the lucky one, Marcus said softly. She saved my life, you know. After Sarah died, I was drowning. I didn't want to get out of bed, didn't want to face the world. But Zoe needed me, so I got up. Every single day I got up. She gave me a reason when I didn't have one. Victoria came around the desk and sat in the chair beside him. My parents died when I was 22. Car accident. I was in my senior year of college. I threw myself into work, into building my company, because if I stopped, if I slowed down, I'd have to feel the grief. So I just kept moving. For 15 years I've been running. She looked at him. Then I sat in that plane seat next to you, and for the first time I wasn't running. I was just present, and it took a plane falling from the sky to make me realize how much of my life I'd missed. Marcus reached out and took her hand. You haven't missed it. You've just been waiting for the right moment to start living it. This can be that moment. We can be that moment. Victoria squeezed his hand. I'd like that. I'd like that very much. They sat in comfortable silence, hands linked, imagining a future that seemed impossible just a week ago. Then Zoe's voice called from the other room, breaking the spell. Daddy, Miss Victoria, I'm awake. Can we make cookies? Marcus and Victoria looked at each other and laughed. The moment was gone, replaced by the immediate demands of a 6-year-old. But that was okay. It wasn't made of perfect, uninterrupted moments. It was made of small, precious ones, stitched together with patience and hope. They went to make cookies. That evening, after Zoe was in bed, Marcus sat down at Victoria's computer with her permission and did something he hadn't done in 3 years. He updated his resume. Not the simple one-page document he'd been using for warehouse jobs, but a real professional resume that outlined his military experience, his medical training, his leadership roles. Victoria sat beside him, offering suggestions, helping him translate military jargon into corporate language. They worked together for 2 hours, and when they were done, Marcus had a document he could be proud of. This is who I am, he said quietly, looking at the screen. This is what I've accomplished. I'd forgotten. The world has a way of making you forget your worth, Victoria said, especially when you're struggling. But your worth doesn't change based on circus. You're the same man whether you're working in a warehouse or heading corporate security. You've always been that man. Marcus saved the document and closed the laptop. Thank you for this, for everything, for seeing me when I'd stopped seeing myself. Victoria reached up and gently touched his face. How could I not see you? You're the man who saved my life in more ways than one. They were close now, closer than they'd been since that moment on the balcony. Marcus could feel the pull between, the magnetic attraction that had been building since the crash. He wanted to kiss her, wanted it so badly his hands were shaking, but he also wanted to do this right. So instead, he pressed his lips gently to her forehead, a promise of restraint and intention. Good night, Victoria. Good night, Marcus, she whispered, her eyes closed. Sleep well. As he walked to the guest room, Marcus felt something he hadn't felt in years. Excitement about tomorrow, hope for the future, the belief that maybe, just maybe, the best parts of his life weren't behind him. They were just beginning. The tabloid story broke 2 days later with a screaming headline, Billionaire's Sky-High Romance. Was plane crash a publicity stunt? The article was a masterpiece of innuendo and carefully worded accusations that stopped just short of outright lies. It claimed anonymous sources had seen Marcus and Victoria together before the flight, that they'd requested adjacent seats, that the whole thing had been orchestrated to boost Victoria's public image and launch Marcus into some kind of celebrity career. It was absurd. easily disproven, and absolutely everywhere. Marcus woke to 17 missed calls and 43 text messages. His phone was exploding with notifications. Friend requests on social media he didn't use. Messages from people he hadn't spoken to in years suddenly wanting to reconnect. Interview requests from morning shows, podcasts, documentary filmmakers. Everyone wanted a piece of the story, true or not. He found Victoria already in the kitchen, her expression grim as she scrolled through her tablet. "This is bad," she said without preamble. "The story's been picked up by major outlets. My PR team is in damage control mode. The board is calling an emergency meeting." Marcus felt the familiar weight of other people's chaos settling on his shoulder. "What do you need from me?" Victoria looked up and he saw exhaustion in her eyes. She'd probably been awake for hours dealing with this. "The truth. We need to tell the truth, clearly and unambiguously. My team wants to release a joint statement. Nothing fancy, just the facts. We met on the plane. You were seated next to me by chance. We survived a traumatic event together. We've become friends. That's it. No romance, no conspiracy, no story beyond what actually happened." Marcus nodded slowly. "Will that be enough?" "I don't know," Victoria admitted, "but it's all we have. The alternative is to let them write our story for us, and I'm done letting other people control my narrative." They drafted the statement together, keeping it simple and factual. Victoria's PR team released it within the hour, and then they waited. The response was immediate and divided. Some outlets reported it straight, accepting their account. Others doubled down on the conspiracy theories, pointing to the fact that Marcus was staying at Victoria's apartment as proof of their relationship. It was exhausting and frustrating and invasive in ways that made Marcus want to pack up Zoe and disappear. That afternoon, salvation came from an unexpected source. Captain Reynolds called a press conference. Marcus and Victoria watched it live on television, Zoe playing quietly nearby. The pilot stood at a podium looking older than he had a week ago, the weight of what he'd been through evident in the lines around his eyes. "I'm here to set the record straight," Reynolds began, his voice firm despite the cameras. "There's been speculation about the events of Flight 447, specifically about 2 of my passengers. I'm here to tell you that every word of that tabloid story is a lie." He pulled out a sheaf of papers. "These are the passenger manifests and seat assignment. Marcus Bennett was assigned seat 23C randomly by the airline's algorithm. Victoria Ashford was assigned seat 23A the same way. They did not request to sit together. They did not know each other before that flight. I know this because I've personally reviewed every piece of documentation." Reynolds paused, his expression hardened. "What I also know is that Marcus Bennett saved every life on that plane, including mine. When our engines failed and I was seconds from panic, he walked into my cockpit and helped me land that aircraft. Then, when we were on the ground and the plane was burning, he went back inside to save trapped passengers. Twice, he risked his life for strangers while others were running to safety." The captain's voice grew thick with emotion. "So if you want to write a story, write that one. Write about the hero who didn't think twice about sacrifice. Write about the man who showed the rest of us what courage actually looks like. And leave him and Miss Ashford alone to heal from a trauma that you couldn't possibly understand." He walked away from the podium without taking question, leaving the press corps stunned into silence. Victoria's phone rang within minutes. It was her head of PR. "Captain Reynolds just became your best friend. The narrative is shifting. People are rallying around you. The tabloid that ran the original story is facing massive backlash." Victoria allowed herself a small smile. "Send Captain Reynolds flowers, the biggest arrangement you can find, and a handwritten note from me thanking him." After she hung up, she found Marcus standing at the window, his shoulders tight with tension. "You okay?" she asked softly. He turned to face her. That man didn't have to do that. He could have stayed quiet, stayed out of it. But he stood up for us, for me, because it was the right thing to do," Victoria said. "Just like you did for him, just like you've done your whole life. That's what good people do, Marcus. They show up for each other." The crisis passed, but it had clarified something for both of them. This scrutiny, this invasion of privacy, it would be their reality if they pursued a relationship. The price of Victoria's success was a spotlight that would inevitably shine on anyone in her life. They talked about it that night after Zoe was asleep, sitting in the chairs they'd claimed as theirs on the balcony. "I need you to understand what you'd be signing up for," Victoria said. "This won't be the last time. There will always be cameras, always be speculation, always be people who think my life is their entertainment. If we do this, if we try to build something real, Zoe will be part of that scrutiny too. I need to know you can handle that." Marcus was quiet for a long time, thinking about his daughter, about the simple, peaceful life he'd tried to build for her. A life where they were invisible, unremarkable, safe in their obscurity. That life was already gone. The moment he'd walked into that cockpit, the moment he'd run back into that fire, he'd made himself visible. There was no going back. "I can handle it," he said finally. "As long as we're honest with each other, as long as we protect Zoe as much as we can, I can handle it. But Victoria, you need to understand something too. I'm not going to change who I am to fit your world. I'm not going to pretend to be someone I'm not. If that's a problem, if you need someone who can play the society game, someone who looks good at galas and knows which fork to use, I'm not your guy." Victoria laughed, a genuine sound of relief. "Marcus, if I wanted someone who knew which fork to use, I could have married one of a dozen empty suits who've been throwing themselves at me for years. I don't want that. I want someone real. Someone who challenges me, who sees through my armor, who makes me want to be better. You do that. You and Zoe, you make me want to be the person I'd almost forgotten I could be. So no, I don't need you to change. I need you to stay exactly who you are. Marcus reached across the space between their chairs and took her hand. Then I guess we're doing this. Victoria's smile was radiant. I guess we are. The next week was a whirlwind of change. Marcus found an apartment, nothing fancy but clean and safe and close to good schools. Victoria helped him furnish it, insisting on buying Zoe a proper bed and desk for her room. Marcus tried to refuse, but Victoria was immovable on this point. Let me do this, please. Let me give her something. He relented, understanding that this was important to her, this tangible way of contributing to Zoe's life. The apartment came together quickly, becoming a real home. Marcus hung pictures on the walls, including one of Sarah that he'd kept packed away for too long. It was time to let Zoe see her mother's face every day, to keep that memory alive and present. He started his new job at Ashford Enterprises, and it was strange walking into that building as an employee rather than someone who'd barely survived a disaster. The other employees looked at him with a mixture of respect and curiosity. The hero from the plane, the CEO's friend, maybe more than friend. Marcus ignored the whispers and focused on his work. He was good at it. Better than he'd expected. Years of military training had prepared him perfectly for threat assessment and emergency planning. He rebuilt the company's entire security protocol in his first, identifying vulnerabilities that had gone unnoticed for years. Victoria watched him work with pride and attraction in equal measure. They started dating properly. Real dates. Just the two of them. Victoria would come to his apartment and they'd order takeout and watch movies on his secondhand couch. He'd take her to a small Italian restaurant in his neighborhood where nobody recognized her, and they could just be two people getting to know each other. They talked for hours about everything, their childhoods, their dreams, their regrets. Marcus told her about the friends he'd lost in combat, about the survivor's guilt that still woke him sometimes at 3 in the morning. Victoria told him about the isolation of success, about being so focused on building her empire that she'd forgotten to build a life. Their first real kiss happened 3 weeks after they'd started dating. Marcus had picked Victoria up for dinner, and when she opened her door, she was wearing jeans and a simple sweater, her hair down and loose. She looked younger, softer, more like herself than the CEO persona she wore to the office. "You look beautiful," he said, and meant it. She blushed, actually blushed, and he realized this powerful woman had been vulnerable with him in ways she'd never been with anyone. After dinner, he walked her back to her apartment building, and at the door, she turned to face him. The awkward teenage energy of a first kiss hung between them, and it made them both laugh. "This is ridiculous," Victoria said. "We survived a plane crash together. Why am I so nervous?" "Because this matters," Marcus said softly. "Because we both know what we stand to lose if we mess this up." Then he kissed her, gentle and sweet and full of promise. It wasn't desperate or passionate. It was tender, the kiss of two people who'd found something precious and were determined to handle it with care. When they pulled apart, Victoria's eyes were shining with tears. "I've never felt this way before, like I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be." "Neither have I," Marcus admitted, "not since Sarah. And I think that's okay. I think she'd be happy for us." Victoria cupped his face gently. "Tell me about her. Not because I'm jealous, but because she was important to you. Anyone who loved you enough to make you this man is someone I want to know about." So Marcus told her. About Sarah's laugh, about how she'd sing off-key in the shower, about the way she'd loved with her whole heart. And Victoria listened, really listened, understanding that his past and his future didn't have to be in conflict. They could exist together, honoring what was, while embracing what could be. That night, after Marcus had gone home, Victoria stood in her apartment and realized it didn't feel empty anymore. Even without him there, even alone, she felt full. She'd spent so many years building walls around herself, protecting her heart, that she'd forgotten what it felt like to let someone in. It was terrifying and exhilarating and absolutely right. She picked up her phone and texted him, "Thank you for tonight. For all of it." His response came immediately. "Thank you for taking a chance on a single dad with baggage and a complicated life." She smiled as she typed back, "Your baggage is my favorite thing about you. Well, second favorite. Zoe is my favorite." His reply made her laugh out loud. "Good answer. Sleep well, Victoria. You too, Marcus." And for the first time in longer than she could remember, she did. 1 year later, Marcus stood in the kitchen of his apartment making pancakes. It was Saturday morning and Zoe was still asleep, exhausted from her week at her new school where she'd already made a dozen friends and been elected class representative. He smiled thinking about it. His daughter was thriving in ways he'd barely dared to hope for. The new school was excellent, his job was fulfilling and well paid, and for the first time since Sarah's death, he felt like he was building a life rather than just surviving one. He heard the door open and close, the sound of familiar footsteps, and then Victoria's arms wrapped around him from behind. "Good morning," she murmured against his back. "You're here early," he said, turning in her embrace to kiss her properly. "I missed you," she said simply. "I woke up alone in that big empty apartment and realized I didn't want to be there. I wanted to be here, with you, with Zoe. This is where I'm supposed to be." Marcus studied her face, seeing the vulnerability there. They'd been dancing around a conversation for weeks now, both of them knowing where this was heading, but neither quite ready to take the leap. Maybe it was time. Before he could speak, Zoe appeared in the doorway, Mr. Bear dragging behind her. "Miss Victoria," she squealed, running to hug her. "You came for pancakes." Victoria scooped her up, spinning her around. "Did. I heard your dad makes the best pancakes in New York, and I couldn't miss them." They ate breakfast together, the three of them, and it felt so natural, so right, that Marcus wondered how he'd ever lived any other way. After they finished, Zoe looked between the two adults with the serious expression she got when she was thinking hard about something. Daddy, Miss Victoria, I have a question. Shoot, baby girl, Marcus said. Are you going to get married? The question landed like a bombshell in the quiet morning kitchen. Marcus nearly dropped his coffee mug. Victoria went very still. Zoe looked at them with complete innocence. Because Sarah, my friend at school, she says when grown-ups love each other, they get married. And you love each other. I can tell. Marcus and Victoria looked at each other across the table. And in that moment, 1,000 unspoken conversations happened in their eyes. Do you? Zoe pressed. Love each other? Yes, Marcus said quietly, never breaking eye contact with Victoria. I do. I love her very much. Victoria's eyes filled with tears. I love him too, sweetheart. And I love you so much. Then you should get married, Zoe said with the simple logic of a 7-year-old. That's what people do. Marcus laughed, a sound of pure joy mixed with nervousness. Well, that's something Miss Victoria and I need to talk about. Adults have to have serious conversations about big decisions like that. Okay, Zoe said, seemingly satisfied. But you should talk fast because I already told Sarah you were probably going to be my new mom and I don't want to be a liar. She slid off her chair and skipped away to her room, leaving 2 stunned adults in her wake. Victoria broke the silence first. Did she just propose on our behalf? Yes, she did. They looked at each other and burst out laughing, the tension breaking like a wave on shore. When they finally caught their breath, Marcus reached across the table and took Victoria's hand. She's not wrong, though, about how I feel. I do love you, Victoria. I love your strength and your vulnerability, your intelligence and your kindness. I love how you've opened up your heart to my daughter. I love who I am when I'm with you. Victoria squeezed his hand. I love you too, Marcus. You've changed my life in ways I didn't know were possible. Before I met you, I was successful, but I was hollow. You and Zoe filled that hollow space with something real, with family, with love, with purpose beyond profit margins and quarterly reports. Marcus stood up and moved around the table, kneeling beside her chair. This isn't how I planned to do this. I had a whole romantic evening planned for next month. Dinner at that place you love, flowers, the works. But Zoe's right. Why wait? Life's too short and too uncertain to waste time on perfect timing. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. He'd been carrying it for 2 weeks, waiting for the right moment. Turns out the right moment was just a Saturday morning with pancakes and a 7-year-old playing matchmaker. Victoria, will you marry me? Will you be part of this strange little family we've built from the ashes of our old lives? Victoria was crying openly now, tears streaming down her face. Yes, of course yes. He opened the box, revealing a simple but elegant ring. Not the massive diamond she could have bought herself, but something meaning. The band was engraved with coordinates. What are these? She asked through her tears. The exact location where our plane landed, where our lives changed forever, where we became who we were meant to be. Victoria let out a sob of joy as he slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly. They kissed, deep and sweet and full of promise, and from down the hall they heard Zoe cheer. I knew it. I knew you'd say yes. She came running back into the kitchen. Can I be the flower girl, can I, please? You can be anything you want, baby girl, Marcus said, pulling both his daughter and his fiancée into his arms. You've already done the hardest job. You've been our cheerleader from the beginning. The wedding was small and private, held in the same park where they'd fed ducks that first. Captain Reynolds officiated, having gotten certified online specifically for the occasion. The guest list was tiny. Marcus's sister Amy and her family. A handful of Victoria's employees who'd become real friends. The flight attendants from their flight, Jennifer crying happy tears throughout the ceremony. And of course, Zoe in a white dress with a basket of flower petals taking her role with solemn importance. When Marcus and Victoria exchanged vows, they spoke not of perfection but of reality, of choosing each other every day, of building a life from broken pieces, of love that was tested by fire and proven true. I promise to see you, Victoria said, her voice strong and clear. Not the CEO, not the image, but you. The woman who's brave enough to be vulnerable, who's learning to let love in. I promise to stand beside you when the world is watching and hold you when it's just us. I promise to honor what we've built and protect what we're becoming. Marcus's vows were equally simple and profound. I promise to trust you with my heart, even though it's been broken before. I promise to let you be part of my daughter's life, to build a family together that honors the past while embracing the future. I promise to be your partner in all things, crisis and in peace, in struggle and in joy. I promise to love you not in spite of our complicated beginning, but because of it. Because the fire that brought us together also forged us into something stronger. When Captain Reynolds pronounced them married, the small gathering erupted in applause. Marcus kissed his wife, and it felt like coming home. The reception was held in Victoria's apartment, which no longer felt cold and empty, but warm and full of life. Zoe had been slowly decorating it over the months, adding color and chaos and joy to spaces that had been sterile showrooms. Now it was a home, their home. As the evening wore on and Zoe fell asleep on the couch, Marcus and Victoria stood on the balcony looking out at the city. Do you ever think about that day? Victoria asked. The plane? Every day, Marcus admitted. I think about how close we came to never having this, how many small moments had to align perfectly for us to survive. 1 second later, 1 degree different, we'd all be gone. But we're not, Victoria said. We're here. We survived. And we found each other. Marcus pulled her close. You know what's funny? If I'd gotten on that plane plane and everything had gone smoothly. If you'd never said those things to me, never looked at us with judgment, we'd have landed in New York and never seen each other again. You'd have gone back to your empty penthouse and I'd have struggled through my job interview and probably failed. We'd have been two people who sat next to each other once and never gave it another thought. So in a weird way, Victoria said slowly, understanding dawning, the worst day of our lives was actually the best thing that ever happened to us. Marcus kissed the top of her head. Crisis has a way of showing us who we really are, and who we really were underneath all the fear and pain and walls was two people who needed each other. Two broken people who could help each other heal. They stood in comfortable silence, watching the city lights, thinking about impossible odds and unexpected love. Inside, Zoe stirred in her sleep and murmured something about wedding cake and flower petals. Mr. Bear lay beside her, a silent witness to the family that had formed around his small owner. This was their life now. Not perfect, not simple, but real and full and worth every struggle it took to get here. The plane crash had taken everything from them and given them everything back. It had stripped away pretense and revealed truth. It had torn down walls and opened hearts. And in the rubble of that experience, they'd found something neither of them had been looking for, but both desperately needed, found home. Marcus thought about Sarah, knowing she'd be happy for him, that she'd love Victoria and approve of this new chapter. Grief didn't disappear, but it could coexist with joy. Love didn't replace love. It expanded, making room for new people, new memories, new beginnings. He'd thought his story ended when Sarah died, but he'd been wrong. That was just a chapter closing. The real story, the one about hope and redemption and second chances, was just beginning. Victoria thought about the woman she'd been a year ago. Cold, isolated, successful, but empty. She'd built an empire, but forgotten to build a life. It had taken a plane falling from the sky to shake her awake, to force her to confront what really mattered. What mattered was this: the man beside her, the sleeping child inside, the family they'd chosen to become. Later that night, after the last guest had left and Zoe had been carried to bed, Marcus and Victoria sat on the couch in the quiet apartment. Victoria's head rested on Marcus's shoulder, her hand in his, her ring catching the soft lamplight. "Thank you," she whispered. "For what? For taking a chance on the ice queen who mocked you, for seeing past my worst moment to who I could be, for loving me even when I didn't know how to love myself." Marcus turned to face her, his hand gentle on her cheek. "Thank you for protecting my daughter when we were falling, for opening your home and your heart, for showing me that it's okay to live again, to love again. Thank you for being brave enough to change." They kissed, soft and slow, and in that moment, everything that had brought them here, all the pain and fear and impossible odds, felt worth it, because this was where they were meant to be, together. A family forged in fire, built on trust, and sustained by a love that had been tested at 30,000 feet and proven unbreakable. Outside, the city continued its endless motion, millions of lives intersecting and diverging in patterns too complex to predict. Somewhere, planes took off and landed safely. Somewhere, strangers sat side by side and remained strangers. But in this one small corner of Manhattan, in this warm apartment filled with the evidence of love, a CEO and a single dad and his daughter had found something rare and precious. They'd found each other, and that made all the difference.